guys, it's Amelia, but not the pilot, just Amelia, and today we're doing our January reading wrap-up. I read quite a few books in January. I also thought that I would start adding in movies as well, because I feel like movies and TV and books are all like similar media, and I'm consuming a lot of both, so I thought I would give you some movie TV recommendations. Let's get into it. So first off, this year I've decided to try to get into sci-fi a little bit more, because I feel like I'm always seeing recommendations for sci-fi, but I just don't gravitate to that genre. And so I've decided to try to make more of an effort to actually read it, because in my head sci-fi is always set in space and written by white men in the 60s, and just not my vibe, but that's not true. So I went on a journey this month. First, I read This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is a novella. I read quite a few novellas this month. This was a recommendation from Carrie Cakes. If you don't know her channel, you should definitely go check it out. This book follows two characters, Red and Blue, and they are on opposing sides of the Time War. We never really fully are explained what the Time War is. The book is only 180 pages or something like that, so that makes sense. But the gist of it is that there's two different sides, and they're fighting over time, and the way they're doing this is they're able to go back in time, but also into different alternate universes, if you will, which they call threads, and change one little thing and it'll change the outcome of the war. So they make sure that this king dies, or this flower was planted, and butterfly effect, they're now winning, and vice versa. It was so interesting, and it's sort of a romance without being a romance, if that makes any sense. So Red is sort of a technology type of side. You get the idea that her body is sort of cyborgy, and her side of the war is definitely technology based, while Blue's side is more garden-y and nature focused. So a classic. But the way they meet is that they happen to start exchanging letters. Now, I use the word letter really loosely here because they aren't exactly letters, but they are sort of. They're very interesting. I just thought this whole book was fascinating. But basically they start exchanging letters because they're both lonely soldiers on opposite sides of the war, and they slowly become friends. I don't really feel like that's a spoiler. I feel like that's quite obvious. I thought it was really fun. It also had a lot of slang or references to things, which I also thought was quite fun. So they would reference Atlantis, the city that sunk under the ocean, or a certain country in 1920 or something like that. And I thought that was fun little tidbits of oh, I know what that is. And then it goes back to being sci-fi whatnot. It's also written by two people, which I think was really interesting. I'm always curious by co-written books, because I am confused how that works, and I'm sure it works differently for every single author and how they work things out, but in my head I thought maybe one person was writing as Red and the other person was writing as Blue. The way the book is structured is super fast and quick, so I definitely recommend it if you're in a bit of a slump. Each chapter is maybe 4 pages long, and it goes from Red's perspective to a letter from Red to Blue, Blue's perspective to a letter from Blue to Red. And it just continues like that for the whole book. I thought it was so fun. The other sci-fi book I read this month was called The Ministry of Time. I also loved this book. It's also not too long, maybe 200 something pages. And it's also sci-fi, but not the space kind, it's the time kind. And I am obsessed with this book. It was so good. The concept is that the main character lives in London, and she works for the government, but she is interviewing for this other position that she doesn't quite know what it is, but we find out. She is interviewing to be a handler, they call them a bridge, to a person who has time traveled. And so the government has somehow gotten its hands on a time portal that you could take people through time. And they're not really sure how it works, so they decide to test it out on about 8 different people throughout history from different time periods by extracting one person from a sort of mass death event. For example, there's a big fire. You take one person out, it's not going to be noticed that they're missing. So that's what they do. So they have a person from World War II, they have a person from Plague London times, and our main time travel focus person is a guy from the Victorian era who was on an Arctic exploration, and the boat got stuck in the ice and then never got freed, and everyone in the expedition died except for him because he was vanished through time. So our main character is partnered with him as a bridge, and she's just sort of there to make sure that he adapts to today's society well. For example, he'll be like, what the hell is this? She'll be like, that's a fridge. And I'm like, what is this? That's the internet. What does this word mean? And so she's just sort of there to like help explain things, help acclimate him to modern society, and they live together in a little flat, and it's very cute, and it's a little bit of a romance, but it was just really interesting. It's got that whole like, what is the government hiding from us? What's actually going on? Romancy, like who doesn't love a Victorian man? Vibes, and I devoured it. I also thought it was really interesting because the author and the main character are BIPOC people, and so she is writing about experiences of having a white dad and I think it was Cambodian mother, and how she doesn't quite fit in to London society, but also she passes as white, but like if she went back to Cambodia, she also doesn't feel like she belongs there, and that sort of diaspora, and how that is mimicked by these time travelers, because the time traveler is a white cis man. However, now going through time, he doesn't really belong there either, but he'll never belong in the past ever again. And so they sort of bond with that, but also explain that experience, which I thought was really interesting. Those were my 2 time travel sci-fi books. Those were my favorites for the month. I also read a graphic novel that was called The Prince and the Dressmaker. As I have previously said, I don't usually really rate graphic novels because to me, I'm there for the art and I'm there for a short time. It took me maybe 30 minutes to read. It was cute. The art was pretty. Animated movie-wise, I finished watching Arcane. It was so good. If you haven't seen Arcane yet, you need to. It's 2 seasons. I heard a rumor that every single second in the entire show took an entire day to animate, which is insane, but also you could tell it's beautiful. And I just thought the cast of characters was so interesting, the way the plots all interlink. I loved it. It's based on the League of Legends video game. I don't know anything about that game, and I don't care to. However, I love these characters. I can't stop thinking about it. So I definitely recommend that. I also watched Lord of the Rings, the animated version from the 80s or 70s. Bizarre. What a time. They just don't make movies like that anymore. Like, the artistry of hand-painted animation, medieval vibes. Craziness. I can't believe also that they, like, tried to fit the whole plot into one movie. Like, what's going on there, man? I don't know. I also watched Wild Robot this month. It was cute. I wouldn't say it was all that great. Definitely a stacked cast and, like, cute concept, but nothing new. And last but not least, if you didn't know, I love SNL, Saturday Night Live, and this year is the 50th anniversary, so I've been watching so much SNL 50 behind the scenes documentary things. There is an entire documentary just about the music of SNL, which was really interesting, but there's also, I want to say, 5-part series that goes into different aspects of the show, and it's just sort of fascinating. I also watched the Saturday Night movie that came out in 2024, and it's just, I think it's crazy how this show has lasted so long, but really doesn't seem to have changed all that much, and also is insane. The way they put it on is every single week on Monday is when they start writing the show. Surely there's a better way. It's just fascinating to me that they even have a show to put on Saturday nights, but I loved it. I thought it was really cool. If you like music, there's stuff for you. If you like SNL in general, if you're interested in the cast, it was just really fascinating to see how they put it all together. Back to books, I read another short story called When Among Crows. This was also recommended to me from Carrie Cakes. This is a Veronica Roth short novella. I didn't know Veronica Roth was still writing. She has been. I just haven't been keeping up with it. But she's the author of Divergent, if you didn't know. I think all of her books are set in Chicago. This one is as well. And it was delicious. I think this is the best novella that I've, like, maybe ever read. I haven't read a lot of novellas, however, it was perfect. It really, like, left me wanting more, but it had a whole plot somehow. only in like 150 pages, which is insane to me. I don't want to say too much because the book is so short and you will be immediately finding out for yourself what's going on. But I would say the vague premise is that there's different groups of mythology creatures in Chicago. So there is a sort of werewolf, a sort of vampire, a sort of siren, that type of vibe. But it's all Polish, I think, mythology. And our sort of main character, I guess you could say it's a trio, opens with him, and he is going to get a petal from a flower that only blooms once a year and grants a sort of cure and wish to whoever is able and willing to get it. I'm jumping through so many hoops trying to not spoil this book. It was really good. I would definitely check it out. And there's a sequel coming out, I think this year, maybe in March. I think this spring, actually. Or November. Who knows? But it was really, really good. And I really wish it was longer. I wish it was a full book, but that's what a good novella does, I think. Another short book that I read is called White Knight by Dostoevsky. That's not how you say that. You know who I mean. I hated this book. I don't know what y'all are on about. I got this recommendation from my friend, but I also saw another booktuber, Jack, talking about it. This man. He said that White Knights was like the most sold book last year, which I think is very interesting. I don't really know why it's having a resurgence, but it is only 50 pages long. It is so short. I just didn't get it. I felt like it seemed very white man savior to me, very like he comes in and he finds this girl who's crying and he's gonna comfort her and it's supposed to be a love story and they love each other, but they don't. He doesn't tell her a single thing about himself. He lets her like rant and monologue and whatever, cool. But like, she doesn't know anything about him. And he just is like immediately attached to the idea of her. Like maybe that's what it's about, but like for me, I was like, I don't like either of them and I don't feel like I learned anything from this book. So I really didn't enjoy that. It was just, yeah, it's only 50 pages though. So if you are trying to up your reading goal, I recommend it. Next, I have 2 short story collections. I don't know why I was very into short stories this past month. I think it's because I was moving and I was like worried I wouldn't have enough time to finish books and whatnot. But I read Januaries by Olivia Blake. I love Olivia Blake. I think her mind is crazy and I think her writing is pretentious and perfect. Love that. Say less. Januaries was really good. It had a lot of really interesting, really weird short stories. I don't know why it's called Januaries, and I don't really know why it's separated into seasons, because I didn't really feel like the seasons correlated to anything to do with the short stories. There's 14 short stories, and I wrote down like few word sentence description of each short story, and I'll tell you which one was my favorite. The first one was, so I don't want to spoil them, and obviously you're gonna read them yourself if you're going to. They're short stories, they're really fast. But I thought they were all really interesting concepts. I also felt like all of these could have been full-length books, but they were very well wrapped up, and I got the whole point, got the whole plot. They are as follows. A short story about a bridge lady, like a troll on a bridge, but she's a woman. Then there's this one about auditing money. I'm gonna tell you about this one because I can't stop thinking about it. The concept of this is the idea that in life, they have now created this thing where you could audit your life, and you go in, you take this test, and then they tell you how much you are worth, and they give you all the money up front. So, for example, the whole point of it is that like, oh, you always want to like be young and travel and have money when you're young, but you don't get money until you're older and you've worked for a long time. So the point of this is that like, we'll see how much you're worth, we'll give you the money up front, and then you have to come work for the rest of your life starting when you turn 40 or whatever it is. And each person is different. They're offered different amounts of money depending on abilities and whatnot. And I just thought that was such an interesting concept. I love this one. It was fascinating, but that's what that one's about. Then there's a vampire servant one. That one was interesting. I love vampires, so I was into it. But she's like a servant, human servant who works for vampires. I don't want to say anything else. Then there was one about like a betrothal with this well, and they're sort of like star-crossed lovers. I don't want to explain anything else. Then there was like this little 2-page thing on marriage, which I think it said in the back of the book this was like a speech that Olivia Blake had done at one of her friends' weddings, and then she like minorly tweaked it. I thought it was really pretty. Then we have a Greek mythology romance. That one was fun. It was interesting. Forgotten zombie witches. I don't want to say too much about any of these because it'll literally spoil what's going on. So this is why I'm giving you these little clips. The next one was commentary on motherhood as a monster. I did not vibe with this one. I didn't get it, but also like, perhaps it's not for me because I'm not a mother. Like, I got it, but I also was like, okay. Then there was this one I also didn't really like that was like bad poems from a poet to a witch. I thought it was fine. Then we have Hades and the Fates, a private chef for demons. That one was interesting. I liked that one a lot. A Nightmare and Her Prince. I also thought this one was really interesting. Very like storybook, fable-y, princesses and whatnot. Then we had my absolute favorite one called Chaos Theory. And it was basically a multiverse of women. And I literally don't want to say anything else because I feel like I've already said too much, but I was obsessed with this one. I literally couldn't stop thinking about this. I also think this is the longest one in the whole collection, but it was so good. Also, like, I first started reading it and I was like, what the hell is going on? I'm so confused. And then it starts coming together and you're like, what? And then the last one was about an alien roommate called Januaries. So maybe that's why the whole book is called Januaries. I don't really know. But I thought it was interesting and was sort of like the female experience explained to aliens. So that was Januaries. I did enjoy them. I thought they were fun. I'll read anything Olivia Blake writes, to be quite honest. Next I read Learning to Hate Yourself as Self-Defense. I thought this one was very interesting. It had a pretty cover and it was a series of short stories, which is why I chose it. And it was free on Hoopla at the moment. I liked it a lot. It was surprising. It had a bunch of very sci-fi-y short stories, but they were very like Black Mirror-esque, which I thought was really interesting. I did not take notes on which ones were which, but the ones that I remember the most, there were a lot of ones that reminded me of Ready Player One, because it was a lot of things about like a world surrounding like VR or like having VR masks and living in the VR and stuff like that. But it was very Black Mirror-esque. The only one that I really remember at this moment, I don't know why, I don't think this is my favorite one, this is just the one I remember, was about like a fan fiction writer. And it seemed like we had colonized Mars, or like the equivalent of Mars or something, and there was a fan fiction writer on Earth writing about living on Mars and this like stupid fantasy fanfic thing, but she was like very socially incorrect, and it was fascinating, and that's all I remember. But I did really like it. I just feel like short stories I have a harder time remembering because I will read each story in like one sitting, and then it's only 5 pages and I don't really remember what happened. But I liked them a lot. Alright, I got 2 things left for you, so I'll leave the book for last. Penultimately, I have played Baldur's Gate 3. I don't know if you've heard about this game, but it's sweeping the nation. I'm obsessed with it, and I don't usually play video games. But I feel like the plot and the story and the world building is so fascinating that I have to recommend it to you guys. I actually think I'm going to make an entire video just on Baldur's Gate and my experience with it and my thoughts, like, as a mainly reader who literally never plays video games, like, why I liked it and why I think you'll like it. But the basic premise that I'll give you for now is that it's basically Dungeons and Dragons, like the tabletop game. So you make your own character. I am a half-elf wizard. And then you go on a little journey with your group of companions. It's a high fantasy world, right? The plot of this one is that you have been infected with brain worms, like RFK Jr. I keep making this joke and like I think it's really funny, but I don't really know if it is funny. Basically, mind flayers, those things from Stranger Things, but they look like this in this video game, have infected you with a brainworm, and the brainworm is causing you problems, making you do things, etc. But it's supposed to turn you into a mind flayer in 7 days, but for some reason it hasn't. And so you and your little group of friends go on this journey to get it removed, or try to figure out how to stop it, or maybe keep it and use those powers. It's up to you. The choice is yours. And that's what's so cool about Dungeons and Dragons and also this game, is that it's literally your choice. Every single person I know who has played this game has had completely different outcomes of a completely different game. I'm actually currently playing it again. Crazy, me? I don't play video games. I'm playing it again because it's completely different. Every time you play it is completely different because it's all down to each individual choice you make completely changes the game. It's fascinating. I love it. I'm obsessed. This is my Tav. That's your character. It's called Tav. I just wanted to show you. There she is. She's pretty. But also, for you romance girlies, this is a romance dating sim, and in this essay, I will explain why. There is 6 main characters that you could romance, but there's also, I want to say 6 more that you could also romance, that are like side characters. And I just think it's really fun, because you could go around and flirt and romance all these characters. You could have a hot little vampire guy. You could have this spicy lady. There's so many things you could do, and then also you could fight. You do your little battles and stuff, and explore the fantasy world. It's so fun. I recommend it. Last but not least, I'm gonna end with a book that you've all been waiting for. That's a lie. I don't think any of you guys care about this. I'm still reading Outlander. Why am I doing this to myself? I don't know, girl. I really don't. So for those of you following along, this is Outlander book 6, which is called Breath of Snow and Ashes. I can't believe I'm still reading these. I really don't know why I am. Okay, where do we start? So if you recall, I read book 5 last fall-ish, and it was awful. It was god-awful. It was so long. It was like 1,500 pages. It literally never seemed to end. This one, also 1,500 pages, but very different vibes. The last one, I guess, was sort of a transitional book because she was going from like them settling down in the US, really like involving themselves in the community, having community problems, the build up to the Revolutionary War, where book 6 is like, okay, the Revolutionary War is started. Like, it's begun, the Boston Massacre happened, what are we gonna do about it? I don't really know. And it did not start until the end of the book. However, it had enough action going on that I sort of cared. Not really. I would say the books are still bad. However, the pacing of this one was much better. The last one was so freaking slow. And then like something would happen maybe every 300 pages. This one had something crazy happen every 100 pages. And by crazy, I mean like the most gory, horrific thing you could possibly think of, or assault. This girl, Diana, she'd be using assault for a plot. That's all she does. And I hate that. I hate it so much. It's not good writing. I'm not going to spoil it, so if you don't want to know what happens, I'm going to tell you now, so you could just leave the video if you don't want to get spoiled. This is also in the TV show. I haven't watched the TV show yet. I've been trying to read them before I watch the season. I'll probably watch this season, like, soon, so maybe I'll talk about it next month and compare them, because I'm really curious how much of this actually happens in the TV show. First off, Claire and Jamie are homophobic. They're homophobic throughout almost this whole book. I was like, what the hell is going on, guys? Why is this now a plot point? But basically they keep like talking about John Grey and his new manservant. And his new manservant is a man from the Boston Massacre who has an M like imprinted, branded on his cheek so that you know he's a murderer, okay? That's all the context you need. Claire and Jamie are like, are they having sex? It's like, that's none of your business. And also, chill out. Like, not in my fantasy book. I know it's historical fantasy, but also just, like, shut up. Like, it's not even relevant. And they just talk about it for, like, 3 pages, and then we move on. We never talk about it again. And then we talk about it, well, we do talk about it again, but it's not, like, it's plot relevant. It's just, like, Jamie and Claire being vaguely homophobic for 8 pages. every couple hundred pages. I'm like, cool girl, cool Diana, we get it. We get it. And I think the worst part is that I think Diana, like, thinks she's woke, and not to woke shame, but I'm gonna. I think Diana believes that the way she's writing it makes it modern and okay. Like, I think she's like, I'm mentioning Native Americans and enslaved people and the gays, but in reality, the way it reads is, the gays! Like, look at that gay! And look at those enslaved people! It's like, why are we even mentioning that? Like, what is going on, girl? It's bad. It's bad, is all I have to say. And her representation of Native Americans makes me cringe to no end. And, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. There's a lot of really tepid and sort of gross sex scenes in this book. More so than the last one. What else? Oh, Ulysses, which is Aunt Jocasta's servant, killed somebody in the last book, spoilers, but for some reason he's back now. They don't really explain it. They're just like, oh, and he's back. That's crazy because he left last book. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, Diana really just be doing whatever she wants. So there's new characters. There's a bunch of new immigrants that only speak Gaelic. Ian keeps leaving and coming back, and I'm like, what is going on? Will we ever find out his story? And we do. We find out that Ian had married this Native American woman, and then they had a bunch of miscarriages, and he was blamed for that. So he got, like, ousted from the group. And so he left, and he feels really guilty about it, but he also wonders if it's him and not her, or whatever. But who knows, because this is the 1800s, and they'll never find out. But he feels very upset about it, obviously. So he finally tells Brianna about, like, maybe the 700-page mark. We also find a house that's completely burnt with a burnt child. That was not fun to read. Fergus is being drunk and maybe beating Marcelly because he only has one hand and he's upset about it. Then we get 300 pages in. Claire gets kidnapped and assaulted like a ton of times because they kidnap her and they beat her up. And then she meets another Native American time traveler. But obviously Jamie and the crew rescue her. Now we're back and Marcelly, she's having her baby and it's not gonna go well. And so Claire's like freaking out. Really weird scene where Fergus and Marcelly have sex right before the baby is born. It was interesting. Marcelly's baby is born and it has dwarfism, and then they have a whole little spiral about this, about how the baby is cursed, about how the baby is switched by Fae, about how Fergus it's his fault, about how it's Marcelly's fault, about how they should kill it. It's skip. Then we get Brianna invents matches. I like how Brianna and Roger are like sort of in it but not really, and it's like every 300 pages, all of a sudden it cuts back to Brianna and she's like, I invented inside water. like she just keeps inventing things. That's all she's here for in this book. So she invents matches in the beginning of the book. By the end of the book, she's now built an entire kiln and is creating like ceramic piping so that they could have indoor plumbing with a shower. It's like, girl, what? And that's what she's doing. I don't know how she's figuring it out, but I get she's got her engineering degree and whatever. But that's like, she literally has no other plot points, I feel like. Well, I guess that's a lie. At the end of the book, she gets kidnapped. As they do, these Frasier women. Then there's a weird funeral. Roger Mack is becoming a priest. That's not what it's called. Minister. Because he wants to help the woman. He wants to help women without people thinking that he's sleeping with them. So he becomes a minister, because not all men. And he does this funeral where the lady like randomly comes back to life midway through the funeral, which was sort of crazy, but then she dies. That was funny. Then we have Lizzie. This is the most insane plot. I was losing my mind. Full soap opera right here. Are you ready? Get tucked in. Lizzie which is, if you recall, Bree's hand servant, like, from Scotland. They, like, came over on the boat together. Lizzie has malaria. She's very frail and ill. The Frasers sort of, like, they don't own her anymore. They freed her, but they, like, she's sort of theirs. Like, her and the dad, they, like, take care of Lizzie and the dad, right? Okay, they don't own them, but wards, maybe? That's maybe the term? They're wards of the Frasers. Basically, they live in the Fraser household, and Lizzie needs to get married. She's marriageable age, and all the men on the ridge like her, even though she's frail and maybe can't have babies. And so she has two choices, and she's trying to choose someone. She finally decides. She picks this one boy. He's a German family, and one day he, like, right before the wedding, like 5 days before the wedding or something, he comes to Claire, the doctor, and is like, I cannot marry Lizzie. And Claire's like, why? The wedding is, like, literally tomorrow. And he's like, well, I'm in love with someone else. And she's like, oh, okay. And he's like, but she's dead. She had chlamydia and she died. And Claire's like, what? Do you have chlamydia as well? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, okay, did you give it to Lizzie? And he's like, mm-mm. And then she's just about to explain to him that she could, like, cure that with her penicillin and mushrooms and whatever. But he gets spooked and he runs out the window and says he's gonna go himself. And so he runs away. The wedding's now off. The German family, his family, is mad at Claire for spreading a rumor that he has chlamydia. Lizzie's upset because now she doesn't have a husband. And they're like, where is he? He ran off into the woods and they don't see him again until the end of the book. So now Lizzie is a single agent again. And we have, if you recall, that Boston Massacre man who is also marriage age, and he sort of likes her, but he also sort of likes Malva. And Malva Christie is Tom Christie's daughter. And Tom Christie, the whole Christie family, very religious. I don't remember which religion, but very religious. Very, very proper, very sort of evil religious, if you will. Like, too far, crazy. Malva be sleeping around. She's pretty as well, and she's sort of Claire's apprentice, and she's smart, and she is oppressed by her family, right? One day, Malva shows up at the Fraser residence with her dad and her angry older brother in tow, and they're like, Malva's pregnant. She won't tell us by who unless you guys are here. Go ahead, Malva. Who did it? And she goes, you, Jamie Fraser, you impregnated me. And he's like, I definitely did not, girly. And Claire's like, what? Meanwhile, the timeline of when Malva's pregnancy works or whatever was right when Claire was sick because the entire ridge had dysentery. Claire did not, but she was very sick, and we don't know what she had, I don't think. Maybe we do. I don't remember what she had. She had some sort of fever. Anyway, Claire had a bunch of bad fever, and they cut all her hair off. Don't really know why. In the TV show, I think they do it maliciously, but in the book, they were doing it because they thought that the fever would rise out of her head easier or something. Anyway, so she now wakes up. She's very feeble. She's very frail. They literally thought she was going to die, and she didn't. Now she finds out, like, Malva cut all her hair off and got impregnated by her husband? What? But then she's like, I don't believe that. I love my husband, Jamie Fraser, and he would never do that. And so she storms out, though, because it's overwhelming. She's got out there. And they're, like, trying to figure out, they're like, Malva, who got you pregnated? Because it's not me. And she's like, it's you, Jamie, I know it's you. And so they're like, okay, well, you need to buy her. Or, like, she needs to be your mistress or something. And Jamie's like, she's not mine. Like, I did not impregnate this woman. I did not have sexual relationships with this woman. And so they're going back and forth. Everyone's really angry, all this stuff. And then a few days later, or maybe a month later, I don't remember how soon it was, Claire goes to, also everyone on the ridge, they all are very angry at the Frasers because they think that Jamie's lying. A few days later, or maybe a month, I don't remember, Claire goes to her beehives and she finds them all knocked over and there's a body. And she's like, oh, what is that? And it's Malva. Malva's dead. And so Claire digs the baby out of her stomach to see if the baby's still alive. I don't know what the logic was there. Baby's also not alive. And so people come and they find Claire with dead Malva and dead baby in her hands. Not a good look. So now everyone really hates the Frasers, and they're like, you murdered her because you were jealous, and you definitely got her pregnant. Meanwhile, they were like trying to figure out who impregnated her, but they like couldn't really figure it out because they were like, oh, she's been sleeping around. Like, who is it? We don't know. Like, Ian was like, oh yeah, I hit that thing, and then like the murderer guy also definitely, and so they were like, we don't know. But flash forward a little bit. Claire is about to be kidnapped again by this man named Brown. I forgot his first name. Anyway, he sucks. He's just there because he wants to kill Claire, and he's like, this is a good reason to do it. Like, I need to take you to jail because you just murdered this woman in cold blood. And they're like, no, we know you're gonna kill her, and she didn't do it. And they're like, well, then prove it. And if you know you didn't do it, then you wouldn't care. You would go to jail because you're innocent. And they're like, that's definitely not how the justice system works. So Jamie's like, I'm coming with you because I know you're about to kill my wife for no reason. You're not actually taking her to jail. And then Tom Christie is like, yeah, I'll come too, and I'll make sure that y'all don't get killed. Because for some reason he's nice now? I don't know. And so they go on this big journey where, like, the guy's, like, leading them around, trying to find a court to take them and take the case and whatever, and also, like, trying to sway public opinion to make Claire and Jamie both guilty, even though they're not really, but they sort of look guilty anyway. But no one's gonna take them because, A, this Brown guy, like, didn't actually think this far. He just wanted to kill Claire. And B, the revolution is about to start. The courts are busy. They are booked. And so they're going around. It's taken months. They're like really tired. They didn't want to do this. And finally, they're like, okay, we need to mess this up. So the guy separates Jamie and Claire and like knocks Jamie out and is like gonna sell him to Stephen Bonnet. That guy's back. And then Claire, he puts in this jail. But it turns out jail is not for her because she is a doctor and she knows too much stuff, and so she immediately gets her way out of there. She midwifes her way out of jail, and she ends up in the governor's house helping the governor's wife. And then the governor's like, you know what, like, yeah, I could use you. And so he sends away his wife, and he pretends that Claire is his wife so that the revolutionaries don't kill his real wife. And they go hang out on a boat because he's scared. Meanwhile, Ian has gotten Jamie before Jamie goes on Stephen Bonnet's ship. This is the end of the book, and it's crazy. It's crazy, man. I didn't even explain Lizzie yet. We'll get to that. So, Jamie then figures out where Claire is. He goes to get Claire, but they won't free her. Tom Christie goes to get Claire because Tom Christie has been in love with Claire the whole time. And he goes and he sacrifices himself for Claire. He says, I did it. I murdered my daughter. And she says, no, you didn't. And then, too late. And so she's free. So she goes free. She goes home with Jamie. Meanwhile, Bree has also been kidnapped. And Bree is now kidnapped and given to Stephen Bonnet. And this is not fun for her, obviously. We don't like Stephen Bonnet, although his actor is very hot, and I think that was very good casting of them. Anyway, she gets onto his ship, and he's about to assault her, as he does, but she says, no, I'm pregnant again. Drops that bombshell, she's pregnant again, oh my god! And for some reason, Stephen Bonnet is like, oh, I don't touch pregnant women. No. And so he doesn't. But he does, like, bring her to Ocracoke Island, because he's a pirate. And then, so she's been kidnapped to Ocracoke Island. He's going to, like, sell her off somewhere because he is like, I'm supposed to ship you to England or something far away, but that's no fun for me, so I'll keep you around here and I'll sell you somewhere else locally and make some money. But obviously Jamie and Roger and Claire and the gang, they go and they rescue her. Meanwhile, they also find Phaedra. Phaedra went missing. Phaedra is Jocasta's maid hand servant person. Phaedra went missing, and Jamie and Claire go to investigate and then decide, oh, Jocasta, you murdered her on purpose because she is your first husband's daughter, and also your current husband is sleeping with her. Too much craziness. Anyway, they rescue Bree and Phaedra. And they go back to their camp, whatever. The war is about to start. Jamie and Claire are getting ready and going, and they start doing battles. Meanwhile, Bree has her baby. The baby's name is Amanda and has a heart problem that Claire is able to figure out. However, Claire's like, I cannot operate on this child because she's a baby and I can't do that. But she will die if she doesn't get an operation. So they decide they're going to try to do the stones again. They're going to go back through time. And so Bree, Roger, Jemmy, and Amanda go back to the stones successfully, and the book ends with the final chapter of them being in modern day, which I guess is like the 70s or 80s, in Lallybroch in Scotland. They're buying Lallybroch, the family home, and they're gonna fix it up. I'm like, cute. So they successfully got through the stones. Other things I didn't mention, because there's so much going on. Lizzie, also the most insane plot you've ever heard. So remember Lizzie, how she had a husband, or like a fiance, and then she didn't. Well, apparently she'd been sleeping around as well, and so Jamie and Claire find they find her dad, and her dad is really upset, and they're like, what's going on? And so they go and they talk to the dad and also Lizzie, and basically Lizzie's like, I'm pregnant, and they're like, okay, with who? Like, who's the dad? And she goes, don't know. And they're like, oh God. And she's like, I have been sleeping with the twins. I didn't mention them yet, but they were from a different book. They're like two twins that like Claire and Jamie sort of, they didn't adopt them, but they like let them stay on their homestead in their own little house. Basically, Lizzie's been sleeping with both of them because at first she was just sleeping with one, but since they're identical, she didn't realize that she was sleeping with both of them. Not at the same time. This was so crazy. I was like, oh my God, Diana, polygamy in your book? Crazy. Like, I bet you all the old ladies reading this book went nuts. Basically, Lizzie's been sleeping with both of them because she doesn't know which one's which, but now she does, but she just sleeps with both of them anyway, not at the same time. And so she's pregnant, but she doesn't know whose child it is. And she loves both of them, and she can't just marry one. And so they have this whole thing, and Jamie's like, okay, we're flipping a coin, and whoever wins the coin toss is gonna marry you, because you need to be married now that you're having a child. And she's like, no, I can't. And they're like, no, we can't. And so they flip a coin, and she's like, okay, you're marrying this one. And so they get handfast right there, but then Lizzie and her two men go down to Roger Mack's house, and they say, please, can you marry us? And so Roger Mack handfasts her to the other brother. So now she is wed to both brothers. And she has the baby for both of them. And so they have a happy little throuple going on, which I think is so funny crazy. And now I'm like really curious about the historical accuracy of throuples. I'm gonna have to do some research. That happens, and what was the other thing that was crazy? Oh, there's a prediction from 2 books ago that the whole reason that Bree and Roger figured out where Claire and Jamie were was that there's a newspaper article saying that their house is going to burn down with them in it and they're all going to die. And so the day comes and they're all freaking out, and they decide to go hang out in Bree's house instead so that they're not like going to be in the house that's going to have fire. But then they're like, well, what if the fire happens here? How does it work? Like, we can't change time. And so they're freaking out, but then it doesn't happen. And they're like, okay, cool. And then meanwhile, Bree and Roger and co go back to the time and go through the future. And then, if you recall that Native American guy from the beginning that I was explaining when she meets him when she's being assaulted and kidnapped, he shows up again and he's like, I know you have the gems. I need the gems to go back through the stones. You need to give them to me. And Claire's like, we don't have them anymore. And he's like, I don't believe you. And basically what happens is they explode the house because Claire has ether, I don't know how to say it, in her house. Which is a flammable gas, and the ruffians that come into her house break all the stuff, fill the house with ether, and then someone lights a match, and the house explodes. And so the house does catch on fire and explode. However, Claire and Jamie make it out safe, and then they go fight in the Revolutionary War. And that book was crazy. So, you know what? I sort of am back on board. I do want to read the next one. I will be watching the TV show. I do think they are still trash. However, at least this one was sort of entertaining. So, thank you for coming to my January book review. Next month, I am planning on reading Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ideal of Being in Love, which is a very popular Dromini fanfic. I'm trying to do more fanfics again this year because I feel like y'all really liked that in the past. So I'm going to read this one. Then we have Small Things Like These, which is a short story novella. Orbital, which was the Booker Prize from last year, is also a sci-fi. Otherworldly, which is like a rom-com, queer rom-com, I think. The Binding. Parable of a Sour, which is a classic and seems very relevant in these times. Fahrenheit 451. Deep End, which is Ali Hazelwood's new romance. I don't know anything about it, but the cover's got hams and it looks like it's about a pool. I'm very excited to read it. It just came in the library. I am also reading Taste, the audiobook by Stanley Tucci. I love Stanley Tucci. And it's been really interesting so far. I also love reading audiobooks, memoirs that are read by the author, and this one is. So that's been really fun. That's my plans for next month. If you have any other thoughts, suggestions, book recs, movie recs, game recs, leave them down below, and I'll see you next month. Bye!